Lovely. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our event this evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Charlotte Pike, and I'm the current chair of the Guild. I'm also joined by Gavin Wren, who is one of my committee colleagues who has organised tonight's event. Now, before we get onto the event itself, I'd just like to run through a couple of housekeeping points, if I may, please. We would love to record this event so that it is available for our members at a later date. So if you are unhappy at being recorded, may we ask you please to turn off your camera and make sure that you are just a blank rectangle, please. Gavin, you pressed record already? Yes. Yep, so we are now recording. Lovely, thank you. May we also please ask you all to put yourselves on mute for the tonight. This is simply so that we can keep the audio quality clear. Gavin is going to lead tonight's session, and we have 3 live polls for you throughout, which should be so you'll see those pop up throughout the session. And at the end, we'll run a Q&A and speak to, we'll ask questions. So if there's anything you'd like in the chat, please do. We'll field the questions to Gavin and our speakers at the end of the session tonight. So anything you want to ask, please do pop that in the chat and we'll run through them at the end of the evening. Oh, we've got a couple more people I'm letting in now. So tonight's event, so thank God it's 2021. I mean, it's been quite a week already, hasn't it? But how is our food world changing? I mean, the events of 2020 have left indelible marks on almost every part of our food world as the social and political landscape has shifted before our very eyes. The prospect of a new normal finally appears, and now it is the perfect time to find out what to expect from the food world in 2021. So tonight, we are joined by our industry experts who will share their expertise about how food is changing from production to consumption and what we can do to help. We're absolutely delighted to welcome our 4 speakers here tonight, and I'd love to introduce them quickly before we hand over to Gavin. So we are joined by Nisha Katona. Nisha is the CEO of Mowglis Street Food Restaurants and founder of the Mowgli Trust charity. And Mowgli is recognised as one of the nation's fastest growing companies according to the Sunday Times Fast Track 100. And she has grown the chain to 11 restaurants across the nation. Is it 11, including Cheshire Oaks? No. Wow.
There's 11 trading at the moment.
Amazing, fast expanding. And we are also joined by Michelle Patel, who is the head of social science at the Food Standard Agency. And Michelle has nearly 20 years experience in government and a background in communications. And Michelle is endlessly curious of scholar perception with a deep interest in how citizens can influence policy making. We have Jason Gibb with us. Hello, Jason, good evening. And Jason is an experienced food and drink entrepreneur and founder of Bread and Jam, the UK's first food founders festival and a one-stop shop for any food and drink business looking for a start, a scale, or to expand. And we also have Jennifer Middleton with us. Jennifer is also a Guild member and has worked in the artisan food and farming industry for many years, working with pioneering retail brands such as Booths and Westmoreland, sponsors of the Guild Awards for several years, I should say. And Westmoreland operate a local sourcing policy and work with many local producers in the areas they operate in. Just let the last couple of people in and I will hand over to Gavin shortly. So welcome to our speakers, welcome to you all. Thanks so much for joining. Over to you, Gavin.
Thanks, Charlotte, for the introduction. Yeah, so welcome everyone, Happy New Year, welcome to the first Guild of Food Writers event.
Around the same time as Justice.
Check they're on mute, I'm getting some voices coming through. Okay, so yeah, welcome to the first event of 2021, and well, what a start as well. It's been an unprecedented opening week to the year, what with what's been happening, especially the last 24 hours. But There has been some good news as well. So yeah, my veg box arrived this morning, so there's something I can rely on. So, but it's been a tumultuous time for our food system. You know, from consumers finding empty shelves through to mothballed restaurants with empty seats, and everyone's felt the effects of these impacts. And you know, that's from businesses through to the social changes. But there obviously is one constant, which is we all need to carry on eating, and that is unchanged. So there, you know, and with any disruption within a within a society, there's always going to be winners and losers as well. So tonight we're going to look at this. We're going to talk about what's happened. We're going to see what changes are occurring, and you know, maybe look at what we can expect to see in the future, or what we can do in the future as well. So just to start off, I'm going to run a few polls just to see what everyone's thinking. So I'll launch the first one now, which is just about asking everyone what you think about who's been hit the hardest in the last 12 months from consumers, farmers, hospitality, small producers, or retail. So if you can just, if that should have popped up on your screen now, and has that arrived on people's screens? Excellent.
Yep. Sorry, Gavin, can you see the results as well as me? Oh.
Can you see the results appearing? I can't.
I can, yes.
Okay, well, when we've reached everyone's voted, then can you hit end poll? And by the way, if anyone hears anything that they think is fascinating tonight, then if you tweet with the hashtag GFW Talks, and we'll, you know, if there's anything that's really great to put out on Twitter, just tag us in that. So what we'll do is there any? How many have we got left, Charlotte?
2 votes remaining to come in. Maybe they're abstaining.
I'm going to end now. There we go. End poll. Have we got the results there?
Yes, we have. Now we have, if I click share results, we have farmers on 2%, retail on 2%, small/specialist producers on 6%, and hospitality on 90%.
Wow. Okay, so there we go. That's really interesting. So yeah, so much so that it's hospitality that's really borne the brunt of what's happened in the last 12 months. So from there, let's move on. Let's move on to our panel and hear what they've got to say. So Jennifer, if I could start with you, you know, can I ask you, what have you seen happening in retail and with producers during 2020? You know, what changes have been occurring?
Well, I think it's safe to say it's been a roller coaster from the very, very start, and kind of every day has thrown up another problem or another kind of conundrum to solve. And really, for the first, I would say, 6 weeks of the pandemic, I was just kind of twice daily briefings about how the supply chain was coping, what kind of social distancing measures we were going to put in store. And it actually, with the intensity of bringing together whole businesses that were all working from home, was just kind of really overwhelming. And then actually looking at, I work a lot in the food and farming sector, and actually thinking about how does a strawberry production, how do you this whole investment, how do you keep that production safe, and how do you ensure that you've got teams to pick those strawberries? So kind of very, there's just this constant kind of working out, you know, can we isolate 2 teams? Can we have 2 teams? And then if one goes down, can we take it back? So it's just that constant contingency of thinking, well, we used to do it this way, but can we do it this way? And actually, you know, how do you get, you know, there was a a deficit of flour, and how do you know, where can we get that? And just to be perpetually nimble is quite exhausting, particularly against a backdrop of just swiftly changing protocols and decision making, which was actually very slow. And I would say probably the major retailers and the independent retailers as well probably actually led the way in making sure that those distancing measures were implemented by them, not suggested by government, that they were actually one step ahead of the government. So it's been a kind of you know, you kind of find your groove, and then something else crops up, and you know, and Christmas was a real challenge for retailers. But I think that we should really celebrate those people who worked on the front line in the supermarket, who actually really did a fantastic job to make sure, under the most uncertain times, to make sure that, you know, we had plenty of food on the table. And actually, and I take my hat off to many small retailers who, you know, who have discovered that the way that they can retail is so restricted, but they've found another opportunity to, you know, move their sales online, or to do deliveries, or to really change the way they do things. So I guess I've come away being very proud of the industry that I work in, and have a deep understanding about how interdependent that food industry is, and I'm pretty damn proud to be working in it, to be honest.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you. And the interesting, like that web of connections you mentioned, that sounds like a huge thing, the interrelations between people and organizations.
I think another thing is the support network of these interrelated food businesses has been remarkable, particularly in the independent sector. And you know, the two great businesses I work for, which are Booths and Westmoreland, they really joined to help their wider supplier family to really cope with what is happening, as well, you know, as those small producers who might have supplied the food service market. They really actually, the retailers that could remain open really did step in to help that producer community, and help where they can, and that's impressive as well. That connectivity.
Yeah. So that's great. Thank you for that, Jennifer. Michelle, I was wondering if we could move on to you, and can you tell us a little bit about your work and what you've seen happening in 2020?
Yeah, of course. If you don't mind, I'm going to share a few slides. I've got some data, rather than me reading out statistics and boring everybody. So just bear with me, and I'll try and make sure I share the right thing. Can you see that? Does that look like it should be something for this? I'm just trying to find the problem. Is the Zoom thing is over the PowerPoint thing, and I can't get it to show the full screen. Can everyone see can everyone see my first slide? I'm going to call that a yes. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm still trying to get this to show, but never mind. And thank you very much for having me here, because it's a great opportunity to be able to share what I do. Often I'm sharing my insights across government and policy, and just as a kind of first plug, I'll come back at the end. We do publish everything that we do. We're a very open department, so all of this data and far more is available if you're interested in this sort of thing. I'm the head of social science at the Food Standards Agency, which is the science-based bit of government that is in charge of making sure that food is safe and what it says it is. We're non-ministerial, and we were set up in the wake of the BSE crisis to make sure that food gets looked after without fear or favour, and with the consumer interest at heart, and that's baked into what we do. And my job is to understand what the consumer interest is, and that's a really big question. And for a start, there is no such thing as the consumer. People are really different and they look at the world in different ways. But for most people, food is a source of pleasure, it's a source of comfort, it's a source of social connection, but it also comes to us via a complex global system. And it personally affects every one of us. There's very little that is closer to home. And it's often an economic and political background. So I think the future of food is going to be as much about changing technology, changing economic realities, changing social mores, as it is about some of the things we talk about a lot in terms of lab-grown meat and that sort of thing. And when we talk to people, and I talk to hundreds and hundreds of people about food every year, I think people don't really engage with the complexity of the food system. But when they're confronted with the future challenges, including things like potential scarcity or climate change, they start to really interrogate their own food behaviours, and they tell me what they're concerned about. And they're concerned about very specific issues, and some of them are on screen here. But what I often see is this tension between convenience and connection. So they're seeing quick food and fast food, digital technology increasing the availability and variety of food. And this fits with our modern expectations and our busy lifestyles. But they also worry that this comes at quite a cost. And that cost is the loss of social connection with food. In recent years, we've moved away from making food from scratch and cooking and sharing meals together. And people do tell me they worry that if we value and connect with food less, we're more likely to waste it. Ironically, for many, 2020 was a chance to connect more over food. One of the other things that changed hugely in the past few months is how people buy food. So people are shopping less frequently, but they're spending more per trip. Online ordering increased by 75%, and it stayed up between lockdowns. People didn't stop doing that. And 36% of us ordered online delivery in the last month, and 20% once a week. We're seeing this translate into an explosion of new business models for buying and selling food. So whether it's dark kitchens or new companies exploiting market niches through platforms like Just Eat and Deliveroo, or food sharing apps connecting people to surplus food, or people using Facebook Marketplace to sell food direct. These new models were already on the increase, but they increased exponentially during lockdown. And local shopping also increased. A third of us are buying food from local shops more than we used to. A third of people have been using a farm shop or a veg box, and that's even more common among more affluent groups and younger people. Some of us are eating more healthily, some of us are not. The net direction, unfortunately, has been slightly towards not. But we know too that people have been trying to cut down on eating meat for various reasons, and when I talk to them, they talk about the climate, for their health, or for animal welfare concerns. But it's still, a majority of people eat meat once a week. But even when we're not in unprecedented times, people worry about striking a balance between healthy food and price. And they worry that food is becoming a class issue, and they perceive a divide between haves and have-not in terms of the kinds of food they can afford to eat. And we may be looking at a kind of two-tier food society. There's some evidence for that. The wealthiest 10% spend 4 times more than the lowest income decile on food. And during the pandemic, this gap's widened. So we know that 1 in 4 people now worry about being able to afford food. 18% have skipped a meal because they couldn't afford food this summer. And this summer, 42% of people under 25 used a food bank in England. I just want to pause on that. I want that to let that sink in. That's nearly half of our young people. And families were also really hard hit. People with disabilities, people from Black and ethnic minorities backgrounds, also disproportionately likely to be food insecure. So where do we go from here? Well, closer to home, bars and restaurants are struggling and will do until this pandemic is over. There's nothing we can say to change that. But when it is, I think we'll see an unleashed pent-up demand from people who can afford to eat out. But I also think that those people might start carry on doing a little bit more local shopping. They might keep getting those veg boxes. They might keep cooking a little bit more from scratch. And we've also some evidence to think that people might expect food businesses to act more ethically than before, perhaps evolving from social responsibility during COVID to maybe sustainability post-pandemic. We're already seeing a big decrease in food waste, and we might see a new focus on health consciousness, not just around obesity and diabetes, but reflected in, again, among those who can afford it, increased consumer demand for plant-based diets or immunity-boosting food or food supplements. But for others, unless there's a radical economic change of direction, the increase we've seen in food poverty will continue. If the recovery is led by a growth in low-paid jobs with low food security, low job security, we may continue to see a steady rise in the amount of people accessing food banks and the amount of people who need free school meals. Longer term, I think we'll see changing consumer preferences, but I do think it'll still be along these lines of healthy food versus high quality food versus convenience versus price. We'll probably see an acceleration of dietary changes towards vegetarianism. We'll see more.
No, just set it up.
Hello.
Yes. Hi.
More of that debate around the future of meat. Longer term, we'll see the debate about plastics re-emerging, and possibly the danger of antimicrobial resistance. And this might change how manufacturers source their materials and from where, but we know that price often wins out. So you can see a world where production location is driven by tariffs and quotas, increasing a centralized intensive production, but promoted under the label of sustainability. And counter to this, I think we'll see an increase in food activism, particularly as controversial decisions on food risk and new food products that used to be made in Europe now start being made here. We'll see socially a greater drive, I believe and hope, towards diversity and inclusion. It'll address inequalities across different groups of people, and that might lead to power structures and the changes in the food system, both locally and globally. And looking back for a second, how many of the foods we take for granted once seemed really foreign at one point? So I think we'll see the continued impact of globalism and the global movement of people. And we'll see new food from new places finding a place and influencing what we like to eat, just like chicken tikka masala has, or fish and chips. And it's probably safe to say that what we eat in the West will influence what people want to eat across the world. We can't underestimate the impact of climate change, whether that's about access to water or the impact of emerging and re-emerging foodborne diseases. And of course, we're going to see the impact of the fourth industrial revolution as convergence of many new and existing technologies mainstreaming into part of how we produce and eat food. And we're looking at AI, robotics, remote sensing, the Internet of Things, digital twins, blockchain, lab-grown meat, wearable tech, virtual and augmented reality, driverless delivery, vertical farming, gene editing, remote working. This will all have an impact on production speed, consumer preferences, and business behaviours. Nearly finished. So it's my job to help make sure the consumer interest is at the heart of the policies that make sure food is safe and what it says it is. So I keep watching these signals because I need to keep up with innovation in the food industry. And I need to anticipate the sort of regulatory innovation we're going to need for a world where your food might come from a farmer's market or Facebook marketplace, and what we need to do to make sure that that stays good for the people and communities that we serve. So we keep an eye on this. Anything you are interested in that I've talked about is published at this website. We publish all our open data as well as the reports. So if you're interested in any of this sort of thing, there's a steady stream of stuff coming through.
Amazing, thank you, Michelle. I'm a big fan of data, and what you're talking about tech there, I think that's something that probably come along a long way this year, and maybe come back to that and get other people's thoughts around tech and food and how that's changing things for us as well. Nisha, I'm wondering, would you be able to share us? I mean, we all know that hospitality's been hit hard. Can you share with us how how it's looked from where you're sitting and what's been going on?
Yes, can you all hear me okay? I presume you can. I'll just keep talking until you nod off. Because I tell you, it was so edifying seeing that poll and how quickly you reached the 90% on hospitality. It really means the world to know that there's an understanding of how beleaguered we are as an industry and how important we are as an industry. And also it's great to see so many faces here on this Zoom call on a dark January evening, because it means there's a body of people that are really interested in food and eating out. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And when we re-emerge, as has been said, I think people will be flocking back to restaurants. And it's interesting from my point of view. So I'm an entrepreneur. I don't know if anyone knows much about my restaurants. I came to it very late. So I was a barrister for 20 years, full time. And the food industry, well, hospitality looked like something that was something that I couldn't ever countenance, because there were not many role models for me in there. You know, it's very interesting coming as a sort of a very middle-aged woman at that stage. And I started maybe 5 years ago. We are now at 11 restaurants, all of them closed, obviously, at the moment. And we're in the process of 3 bills. And so I sit on a lot of panels with other CEOs and other founders. So I founded the restaurant, and I'm the CEO and the exec chef, etc. And so, you know, all the decisions and the brunt of it, I feel before anyone. And it is a very sad place for a lot of hospitality. I mean, the statistic is that 40, 50% and growing of restaurants will not re-emerge, of pubs will not re-emerge, because they didn't have the resources, obviously, to ride this through. This is possibly a bit boring for a food call, but one of the biggest debates and one of the greatest anxieties for people in hospitality, people who own restaurants, is the rent debate. This relationship between tenants and landlords, and suddenly we're into property law on a food call. But honestly, the corollary of the food industry is that we present food to people in these restaurants, and because there's been no resolution of the rent we do, we're still paying full rent on many of my sites, even though there is no revenue. And that is what will hemorrhage the ability to stand back up on our feet. And that is the plight of many, many restaurants. So you see it us as an industry at our lowest. And that's why you see that we are pleading for a minister for hospitality, just someone that can broker a really collaborative deal with government to maybe intervene in some of those leases and into legislation. So that's kind of the boring bit, not to do with food. Emotionally, it's really interesting. And the reason I gave you my background is because coming to business from a background of something very different makes me what one might call an entrepreneur, which I didn't realize I was. And I think the entrepreneurs are they are quite optimistic. I think once you sacrifice the roof over your head and everything you had, I sort of view COVID and think, well, if I can come out of this in my underpants, I will be all right. And so I really do think that, and what has been shown is that when we came out of lockdown in August, people were queuing around the block. So there's this renewed zeal for the high streets, not just hospitality. People realize that what went out with COVID are the lights on our high street, the very reason for living. For me, it's the reason for living and earning and working, is so that I can earn enough to go to a restaurant and eat. And I think people I saw in my restaurants, and of course you've socially distanced and all of that, but people were bringing their families out, their children, their grandparents. They were coming together in quite a different way, almost in the trattoria style of Italian dining, you know, where restaurants were being used far more frequently. It's then incumbent on restaurants, and this speaks to the future, for us to be reasonably priced and for our food to be of really good quality. So those people want to come back and eat with us. The aim is 2 to 3 times a week. It should be so affordable and so digestible and so good for you that people will want. But this is what we're all looking to. It's really important when we look at who's going to come out of this, that those boxes are ticked. It's really interesting. Michelle, you were talking about the way that, you know, the social mores, how people, this will change the way that people view food. And I hope it changes the way that people view restaurants. And what has been interesting is when, for instance, there are many noble businesses like Mowgli where we do the right thing, we're predicated on our ethics. So even before furlough came out, we paid our staff in full because we knew something would happen. You know, we top our staff up. We got 500 members of staff and I haven't lost a single one. So we did everything that was right. There are many companies, food companies, that behaved in restaurants, bars, pubs, that behaved in a reprehensible way. It's really quite interesting. But what was very interesting is once we reopened in August, I thought people would bear this in mind, but people still flock to those places that you can get a full English breakfast for £2 in. Even my own 17-year-old daughters were doing that, you know, they'd go down to the Spoons or whatever. So it's really interesting. I wonder how long people will remember the way that people behaved during COVID. I'm not sure they will. I think what they will do is demand reasonably priced, really delicious, good quality food in a place that makes them feel that they are home from home. And for me, that's, as restaurants, what we need to provide to be able to survive. We need to be that place where you can take your children, your dogs, your grandparents, wheelchair accessible, all those things that matter so much to me, and people can feel home from home and frequent. And that's the point. They need to frequent those establishments to keep them alive. So I personally quite I'm very confident about the future. Thank heavens I built Mowgli in a way that I build my own domestic, financial situation, in that we've got headroom. So when we come out of lockdown, we will build another 2 sites immediately in Cheltenham, Cheshire Oaks, and then we just signed Glasgow. So, and the reason I say that's not for swaggering, that is because with each site, we create another 80 jobs, and we create jobs for those 16 to 24-year-olds that we are mandated to protect. We are that, hospitality is that incubator profession where, people very often come into it at an early stage, and hopefully it's a place that they will stay. We employ over 3.2 million people in this industry. So it's really important to not just survive, but to grow. So that's kind of my view. I'm optimistic that you get an idea of the pressures.
Amazing, thank you, Nisha. And if I'm correct, I mean, you've got a view on rents. Is this a reason why you actually said you won't open a restaurant in London? Is that correct?
I won't, sorry, I shouldn't say that. I would love to. I've got a flat in London. London is where I did my best years of my life. I met my husband in London. I would love to open in London. Those rents are not only punitive, they are terminal. London rents are unconscionable. So I'll give you a really frank example. This is what it's like. And you can imagine putting yourself in my shoes where you're thinking, should I do a restaurant? Should I not? I know nothing about this. For a site in Liverpool, where we have queues all day long during normal times, you're talking about sort of 35 to 40,000 pounds for a restaurant per annum. For the same size site in London, where you can't necessarily guarantee the same footfall, because if it's in the city, it depends on timings, 285,000 pounds a year. Can you see? So can you see at 10 paces why it makes no financial sense yet? When there comes a site that is the right rent, I would absolutely take it. I would love to be in the city. But my other philosophy is that why am I not creating every Mowgli I build? We give over £500,000 to charity every year through the Mowgli Trust. Why am I not supporting those provincial charities, creating jobs outside of London, paying those great taxes to keep? I live in Birkenhead, to keep the roads and the markets here open. So I'm quite passionate about that. We cook fresh every day on site, and I take locals. I take local Scousers or Mancunians or Sheffield folk who can't cook curry. And that's my point, is that I train them to do that. So even if they leave me, there's a good curry chef out there in the world. And I'm very evangelical about taking the provinces and leveling up in that way, in my own way. So there are many reasons why I'm not in London. The right site comes up, I'll take it. But for every 1 site in London, I can create 2 outside of London when, by God, they need it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that, the social impact, like you say, of the jobs, of the training, I mean, that's multiplied. So that's amazing. And that leads also the entrepreneurial strain onto Jason as well. So Jason, I mean, I can imagine it's been a challenging time for startups and people setting out into food business and, on this road. And can you tell us a little bit more about what you've been seeing?
Well, yeah, like you said earlier, there have been winners and losers, and it's really been a kind of schizophrenic experience, I think, for our community, for the food and drink startup world. Some businesses have seen their sales go through the roof, and others have had the rug pulled out from under their feet. When I advise a lot of businesses that are starting out, launching, or someone's got an idea and they want to create a brand. And one of the kind of things that I drum into people is to make sure that they create a business with a broad spectrum of customers. So, they should have a kind of multiple routes to market. So you don't rely too much on one customer, and if they just happen to disappear or go bankrupt or whatever, you're resilient to it. But we've seen obviously businesses that have got a lot of dependency on food service have had a nightmare, whether that's restaurants, pubs, hotels, schools, hospitals. They've really suffered. But businesses selling into retail have generally done pretty well, and businesses selling direct to consumer they have had a brilliant time. To be honest, they've all done really well. and then within kind of different types of products, obviously it's been a real mixed picture in terms of success. People who are working on baking goods, ingredients that you can use for scratch cooking, products. There's a lot of people in our community who are doing products that are focused on health and immunity, and they've done really well. Likewise, there are a lot of people in my community who have got impulse snacks and on-the-go products, and it's been really cruddy for them. But the thing about the startup and challenger brand community is that it's characterized by its ability to be nimble and flexible and pivot quick, and I think that's given them a big advantage over the larger corporates and stuff. So obviously, if you weren't online already or had a direct to consumer proposition, pretty much everyone I know has found some sort of e-commerce direct to consumer aspect of their business, or they've tweaked their proposition so it's kind of more suitable for consumption at home, whether they're restaurants producing DIY vegan burger kits or whiskey drinking kits, that kind of thing. So there's been loads of amazing and inspiring innovation and pivoting. And I think another thing that has been really good about the consumer habits that we've seen is that I think before lockdown there was a bit of barrier for people buying on loads of multiple small websites from smaller retailers. It was a bit of a pain in the butt creating an account or ordering from smaller retailers, and I think that has changed, and people are finding these really interesting producers and brands. They're signing up to their newsletters, they're creating accounts, and I think they're therefore kind of interacting with these really authentic small food and drink startups. And I think those relationships, now that they've kind of been formed, will persist and grow. So I think that's one good long-term effect. But so like I say, and like I think most people have said, it's been a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, that's amazing. I keep on hearing this thing that seems to be common across a few of you, is this sort of sense of having to be dynamic, we've got a food system that's having to really be very quickly changeable, able to pivot and be dynamic and change its offering and what it's doing quite quickly to survive. I was wondering, Jennifer, if I could come back to you. In that respect, are there changes that you've seen that you think are going to stay, especially in terms of perhaps what's going through the retailers, or what products and or people's habits that you think might stick with us now?
I do. I think we've seen an increase of the big trolley shop, which kind of was something that we hadn't seen for maybe 20 years. Where people used to just go and do their supermarket shopping once a week, and then everybody was shopping little and often, and they might have lunch at Nisha's place, or they might eat out, or they might do this. And with all of those meals now being taken in the home, that's really changed how we do things. And I think that the big shop is back, and people will feel uncomfortable about shopping at too many places. I think if you were an independent retailer and you gained customers over the pandemic because they felt safe or nurtured or looked after, or they liked that, you will keep those customers because that has engendered a bond between the customer, that perhaps they were a bit more promiscuous in their shopping. The move to scratch cooking, I think, is an amazing thing. And I think that we've rediscovered that we can cook in our home. And I think that will have an enormous societal benefit beyond the pandemic. I think that that will be a real takeaway, that people have rediscovered their kitchens, and probably very importantly, and I think, Michelle, it was in your presentation, people are sitting around a table as a family again, which I think, you know, and actually food has become part of our entertainment. Shopping is entertainment. You know, if the only place that you can go is the supermarket or your local retailer, your cheese shop or your farm shop, you're going to want to see a fresh offering, so difference and differentiation. So Jason, your startups, there's real opportunity for them, and actually maybe opportunities that they might not have been able to capitalize on, because they can get a foot in the door and you know, they can, buyers are at home now, they can maybe contact them, they've got time to but you know, I think if you're a tenacious person, you know, and you've got the right product, now's the time, because those retailers are looking for something new. Safety is going to be a big thing, and delivery. And I hope, and Nisha, this would be a conversation that we can pick up outside this. I would hope to see, and I think some collaboration between independent retailers and hospitality, that maybe actually we can help each other out within that, or kind of look at how we can support those wider communities. One of the things I'm particularly proud of over in the early part of the pandemic is Booths initiated a campaign, a Save campaign, to support, initially it was our artisan cheesemakers, and Charlotte, somebody that worked with that to help really kickstart it. But one of the biggest cheesemakers, Graham Kirkham, who makes proper farmhouse Lancashire cheese, he had gone from selling 600 cheeses to 6, and his farm, the whole farm, none of it made any, you know, he just couldn't really see how it was going to stack up. And I spoke to Nigel late on a Friday night, and Nigel called him on a Saturday morning, and they worked out a plan. And he said, and Nigel said, what can we do to help? And he said, buy more cheese and sell more cheese. And it is as simple as that, is actually finding a marketplace, and actually, and if you're lucky to have a marketplace to help out those businesses that are really struggling, because if we lose those businesses because of this pandemic, our kind of the fabric of our food culture will be altered forever. So I see nimbleness is really important, but those are the kind of main takeaways. And actually, if you can find some delivery method, if you can pack up your meals and you can sell them online, that is, that's a really great opportunity. So pivoting and actually saying, you know what, we might not make any money on this, but we will keep our teams and we'll keep our market share, or we'll keep our vision in there, and we'll survive. We might, as Nisha says, we might be down to our knickers, but if we can survive, we can come out kind of being okay. And yeah, we share a sense of optimism on that. I think you have to either be crazy or optimistic to work in the food industry. Luckily, I'm both.
Yeah, definitely helps. So, and so you also mentioned about the people having improving their relationship with food. The big shop. There's this kind of a niche as well. You mentioned earlier about the more sort of the family engagement around food, sort of people coming together. And that's a very much, a very social thing around food. But at the other end of the scale, we've also heard a little bit about tech, this being technology really being a big part of food, especially going forwards. Nisha, I was wondering, because how do tech and this familial kind of relationship to food fit together? Is that a thing in your business as well? Has that impacted you?
Well, it's very interesting because every board meeting we have that tech section that leaves me so cold. Don't hate me, Jennifer. Just I tell you,
yeah, no, it's a tough. I agree.
It's a real. I remember going to, I can't remember, some quasi chain, probably not dissimilar to Mowgli, and at the end of it you get a bill, but before you can even pay, you have to fill in all these things on a thing with buttons, and you could lose weight, you could lose all the calories that you'd eaten trying to just pay the damn bill. So it leaves me a little bit cold. It's very interesting though, because it's a really important point. So tech it covers a multitude of avenues. So there's things like delivery. And it is really interesting, Jennifer, your point, because here's the thing: whenever I choose a site, different cities eat in different ways and they use delivery in different ways. So London is a big delivery centre because people work late, so people work possibly in the city, they then stay for a drink, they get home quite late, and it's then not so easy to get dressed and go out. In the north, in the provinces, what happens is we finish work at 5, we're home by 5:30, you've walked the dogs, you can be dressed up to the nines and back out. So delivery does not, it's really fascinating, it doesn't work. There are certain cities it does. Cambridge, London, Edinburgh works brilliantly. Manchester is growing a little bit. Liverpool, people go and eat out, which is a wonderful, therefore, if any of you want to open a restaurant, come to Liverpool. I'll find you a site. We need good restaurants. Seriously, Sheffield, Nottingham, so Leicester, all of these places where I have restaurants, kind of red brick university cities is what I aim for. Delivery is not a thing. So that's one bit of tech. But one, just looking at the geography of the country and the nuances within each city and how they eat and how they work and live, it works in some places, it doesn't. So we don't do much delivery. We try, we call it swing by, really hasn't sort of taken off. And we don't need it, because what that means is then resurrecting a kitchen, unmothballing the whole of Mowgli for what? I think we made, honestly, 1 week, we made £26 during lockdown on delivery. It's not worth it. And it's fine. She's mothballed, she's safe. So that bit of tech I understand, and in the right cities I would do it. But the other bit, I don't data capture on principle. I will not data capture. I'm not interested in that. Where tech gets really interesting and where it is my life, in a way, and the way I built Mowgli is social media. And this goes to everything that you've been discussing, the way that people cook. So through lockdown, I did a video a day, and literally I have teenagers and 3 dependents over 80. So it's quite a busy household, 8 dogs or whatever. And it's cooking with those humble ingredients at the back of the fridge within 30 minutes. And I would film that every day and put it out. People want to cook, people want to engage with the face behind, your Mrs. Kirkham's cheese. And that's what's so wonderful. It's Mrs. Kirkham's cheese. And there's a guy called Kirkham. And you want to know about people like that. People are now demanding to know that face, that soul and the ethics behind a restaurant more and more. You as a founder have to be out there proclaiming the things that you believe in the way that Tim Martin does, in the way that I do, in the way that the Pilgrim Boys, the Pizza Pilgrim Boys do. You have to be visible, and you have to talk about the things that matter to you, be that your dogs, be that how it is to juggle a household and cook, and still the impetus is on me as the female to do the cook, whatever, all of those. It's really interesting. People are buying into, they're looking at the nobility of a business and thinking, is that a business to which I'm going to give my allegiance when we come out of lockdown? And so as a result of social media, Instagram, which is really just me planting courgettes, cooking those courgettes, whatever, our following grew more than it did outside of lockdown. And I'm a prolific tweeter and a prolific Instagram follower. So it's really interesting. Technology is being used to look at the face behind a business more during lockdown than anything. But the question is, it goes back to Michelle's point, how long will they remember that? I think what will happen, I watch my teenage daughters, what will happen is they'll remember that for about 2 weeks. This is my sort of cynical view of it. And then they will go to the place where they can get a full English for £3. We're always going to be up against that, I think. So it's really interesting. It's a conundrum, but those are my sort of views on tech. Really important in terms of social media. But I think when you come into my restaurant, I don't want you to mess with any buttons. You can pay, with your card and flash it in the machine. I really don't want you to have to press buttons. You come, eat, talk, interact with us. personally, I think raising teenagers, I find them something, I find them repulsive, really.
Sounds like you want to really keep it on that human level.
Yeah, at the moment, and I may change my mind. If we do this in a year, I might be a different human, but right now, I just don't think it's something that I don't want Mowgli to incorporate that kind of way of paying and that kind of way of ordering on a tablet. I have no fondness for that. Yeah. We see enough of tablets in our day-to-day life, don't we? And screens in our day-to-day life. When we go to a restaurant where it's food, it's organic, you touch it, you eat it, you're with people you love. I don't want to be pressing buttons anymore, really.
Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from with that, for sure. And I mean, Michelle as well, I mean, I think this like follows on beautifully about, what you were saying earlier. Do you have any other thoughts about this, this sort of what I kind of see in some ways, as Nisha even mentioned about, this kind of conflict between our human connection with food versus the technological, perhaps, disconnection, as some could see it?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's a false dichotomy. I think that used well, and I've seen lots and lots of, for example, local suppliers using technology really well to connect with their communities, to, local egg providers, local vegetable providers can set up delivery. They can work out where their hotspots are. You can have, we've had things like, vans come to a street and everybody in that street has decided that this is the night they're going to get tacos. So if you can use the data that it provides, and I agree that it's not part of the restaurant experience, but if you can harness that sort of technology, it's not just for the Ubers and the Just Eats. Actually, there are local businesses that are necessity's been the mother of invention, and they've actually proliferated over the past few months and accelerated a curve that we were looking at a couple of years ago, because obviously from our point of view it chucks all our regulatory models out. We have to sort of find a new approach, but that's why we try and keep up. Further out, I mean, what I can't stop thinking about is what difference would things like a driverless car make? I mean, we talked about Uber, but what if you could go out, have a few drinks, have a lovely meal, everyone in the party could do it, and then your car comes and takes you home. And we're only a few years off that, actually. So looking at that convergence of other tech on the eating and food experience, it goes quite broad.
Yeah, there's a lot of avenues that feed into it and can benefit or detract from the experience, I guess. And I mean, Jason, do you have any thoughts as well on this, how people are engaging on a human level or with technology?
Not necessarily, but it's kind of made me think about another divergence that we're kind of another dichotomy that I'm seeing in terms of people are feeling a lot more kind of like connected to the planet and to their personal health and to nature, and things like plant-based diets are just going to go even more bigger and more mainstream, and immunity things and gut health, like I mentioned earlier. But they're kind of, on the other hand, people, I still think that people want indulgent, convenient foods. We've got a lot of time on our hands at the moment, but so there's that one extreme of eating really great ingredients, very scratch cooking, but we also want to treat ourselves, and we want to have fun, and we want to have junk food. And then a kind of another thing to kind of throw into that is I think that with this double whammy of Brexit and the COVID crisis, and means money is going to be short, we want all these things at the right price as well. And I think, in terms of kind of my food startup world, if there are businesses out there that can hit those kind of three things, healthy, indulgent, and at a good price, you're onto a winner. I'm going to invest in that company.
Yeah, and that whole the environmental and the health impacts of food, I think that's only going to grow as time goes on. It really is, especially as generational changes occur as well. So I think what we'll do, we'll do another little quick poll now, which is just I'll just launch that. And if you've done that one, if I can launch it, for some reason the poll is not working. Okay, well, we can there we go. Poll 2, there we go. Right, launch the second poll. So while you're doing that, if that's appeared for you all, while you're doing that, if you've got any questions, if there's anything that's come up that you want to ask the panel, or if you, anyone in particular, or just wider questions that you would love to hear from people, then put them in the chat. And what we'll do is in a minute, we'll go over to those and ask the people what they think. So hopefully, Charlotte, is the poll results, are they?
I'm not seeing the poll, Gavin. No, I don't think the poll's coming through yet. Would you try again, please?
Damn, the technology is failing us. Damn tech. If only it was a human interaction, we'd be fine. Okay, no, it's not launching. So if you could try to launch poll 2, otherwise we can skip the poll.
Oh, it's come up.
Hey, Charlotte is the poll master today, obviously.
Oh,
no,
the first one.
Relaunching the first one.
There's a little drop down arrow next to the poll 1, and then
yes,
poll 2.
Yes.
Brilliant.
It's okay. I came in and did that.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Yeah, so if you're doing that, so if you've got any questions, Charlotte, have we had some questions come in?
Yes, we have now. Oh, it's all going on my screen. I've got your live polling coming through.
Now it's all happening.
I'm just going to start from the top. Well, there's a lot of love for listening to everything our speakers have had to say tonight. Let me have a look. Lots of requests for different locations for your list for new venues, Nisha. Lots of people are asking you to come to a place near them. So Sally Jane Wright is asking if London restaurants are more dependent on tourism. Wendy Veal is saying that life in the Cotswolds, they would go to, and in rural life in general, they perhaps go to a local pub 2 to 3 times a week, but actually not restaurants. So she agrees with what you say, Nisha, changing the vision and becoming local and casual might be a good move for several establishments. Just having a look.
An interesting point about the local restaurants question, Nisha, because do you know much about your customers, if they're sort of regular local people, or because obviously I know that one of the things that happened during the first lockdown was the central London restaurants realized, that they were very much not served by local people. They were tourist restaurants effectively, because people come in from zone 2, zone 3 or further out. Whereas these, that ring of restaurants in zone 4, 5, 6 serve the local communities. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that?
You're absolutely right. And that's no indictment on those restaurants in the centre of London. They are there for tourists, and they're the reasons we go to London. It's the reason I go there once a week to eat. Honestly, I go to London once a week to eat. It's the best city in the world for food, in my view. But you are so right. So during lockdown, once we came out of lockdown, but there wasn't a fully fledged city centre workforce, because people are now abandoning head offices, aren't they? Even we're abandoning head office. The Richmonds, the Barnes thrived, whereas the city centre is a ghost town. It still is a ghost town. So yes, of course it's dependent on tourism. You're absolutely right, whoever asked that question. And that's no indictment. It's a great thing. It's great that it's one of the reasons people come to this country, because of how wonderful the London food and how diverse that London food scene is. So yes, that's absolutely right. It's the provinces that then start to thrive. And that point about the way that we present ourselves as restaurants, we need to be so much more inclusive. But do you know what the truth is? It's price point as well. And that it's really interesting, because what government might say, you may have seen the headlines yesterday about holidays suddenly becoming more expensive than they've ever been before. So trying to book a flight, etc. now, prices have gone up because people can take advantage, companies can take advantage of that. You slip a little price increase in. With food, we're a lot more demanding. And it's the reason that people are more demanding. So we monitor in Mowgli, it's very important, we monitor how frequently these people are coming back. And my aim is, if my food is not so addictive that you need my dial, and we are primarily a meat-free menu primarily. And if I can't get you addicted to my dal, so you need it once a week, I will have failed as a curry evangelist, you know. So we monitor it because it goes to my raison d'etre, and it is people returning, you know, that it becomes that they don't even need to look at a menu when they order. It's really important that, and that's hope. So I have a philosophy in Mowgli where my food has got to be addictive. Only then is it worthy of adoption. Only then do families think, okay, this restaurant can become part of the family, our default place as a family to eat. And then you get allegiance. So it's addiction, adoption, allegiance. And that comes down to, is that food really so sensational that you will physiologically miss it, you know, once a week, once a fortnight? Is it affordable, really? Is it worthy of us adopting it as part of the family? Is it kind to our family budget? And only then do you get the allegiance. So you're right, we have to review the way that we as restaurants, I said it in the chat, really operate. You know, those local pubs where you get that smile. Often it's the only smile you'll see in a day of the, you know, your server. It's home from home, and that's how it's the way forward. I think it's the European way of eating.
It's a lovely image too. It really is. Charlotte, are there any more questions?
Well, should we just do the poll results, because we have a third to do as well, don't we?
Yeah. So
we
how
97%. If I click share results this time, I think that goes straight to you. So spring is on 6%, summer is on 38%, autumn is on 40%, and winter is on 15%.
Okay. You know, it's really interesting to see how, you know, how this unfolds, and obviously we're all hoping it recovers quickly, but you know, we've got to be pragmatic about this as well. So what other questions have we got? Let's see.
Just scrolling through. Oh, Katie Caldaisy's here tonight. Now Katie has a restaurant in Marylebone, and your landlords are actually charging you a percentage of income on your rent at the moment, and you hope that that will continue. That's really, really interesting to know. And is it 3 restaurants you have, Katie? 2. Fantastic. Where else? Gosh, so many lovely comments about tonight. Judy Jackson, she's asking you, Nisha, what advice would you give London restaurateurs struggling with a lack of tourism, high rents, and no funds to support staff?
I've been answering these questions in chat, but I think I've been answering directly.
You have. Directly. I'm so sorry.
Sorry, whoever AJ Sharp
You're
is.
on it.
But you know, this is the point, is that there is a moratorium in place now that will expire in March, at the end of March, which means that there can be no legal action taken for non-payment of rent. This is the time where you need to really negotiate with your landlords, either for a 50% reduction or for a deferral. The theory is there should be no revenue, no rent. You know, this perhaps is a bit of an extreme, but this is the time where you go to them and with the plaint that, look, there is no revenue. We are a viable tenant. Once we come out of this, we will be here paying your rent. Otherwise, what they face is it's another, you know, the gapless smile of the high street. Do they really want to lose another tenant? So it's really time to go hard against your landlords, because there has been a very feudal relationship between tenant and landlord. That's actually the way it's been. And you know, there is, amongst many of these big landlords, there's no financial fragility. They don't feel anxious about it because they're big funds. They don't feel the anxiety that we feel. So we have, those scales have got to fall from their eyes, and it's down to us to go and negotiate with them and say, we need you to reduce rent by 50% or defer those rent payments. Otherwise you won't have a tenant. And who's going to be left? This will be apocalyptic for hospitality. There will be so few restaurants left to take those places. There will be less retail because of online shopping. So who's going to take their places? They need to be circumspect. It's all about the rent. Furlough's been great as well, so obviously taking advantage of that.
Thank you very much. Just having a look through questions. Sally Jane, again, many people have lost their jobs or been furloughed. To what extent will price be the decider of where and how they shop in 2021 to 2022 online delivery? I don't know. Gavin?
Sorry, I missed that.
So Sally Jane is Sally Jane Wright is asking to what extent price will be the decider of where and how people shop over the next year. Online delivery is expensive.
Yeah, Jennifer, do you have any thoughts about that, about price being a decider for consumers?
I think there's a big divide, and I think if you've managed to keep your job in the pandemic, you have a considerable disposable income because you're not spending it on holidays. You're probably spending it, so your spend will go up. But obviously there are many people who are facing huge uncertainties. So price is really keen, and we mustn't confuse price with quality. And I do think that there is a real shift to really demanding the best quality for their food. And I would say that the biggest retail trends are local, artisan, British and craft. Is that people do really want to know the story. Like Nisha says, they want to know the story of where their food came from. They want the insurances of it. And if they are going to part with their cash, they want to make it sure it's the very best. And I know that we've had a lot of, there's been a big rise in flexitarianism. And actually, from my standpoint, and I work for northern retailers, and maybe there's still a real demand for good quality, locally reared meat. And actually, we might be eating less meat, but we're eating better meat. And I think some of the convenience and Jason, and maybe all of it will be, a distant memory as the lights come back on. But I actually think that we will have a better value of the supply chain and the food chain. So we will want better value products. So we will want better value for our money. And actually some gimmicky food or anything that is kind of trend based, I think we are going to go back to core product, a good primary source food, the best strawberries, the best meat, the best root vegetables, that's really where I think customers are going to want to buy.
Thank you.
But is that every type of customer? Or is that the kind of, the customer?
Well, like Nisha, I've got teenage kids, and those teenage and young adult kids, and they are very ethically minded consumers. They really do want to know. And actually they have turned their back. It isn't just my own kids. My daughter wanted a sewing machine, fast fashion, all of that. They really see the consequences of a throwaway consumer culture. And actually, I think that they have pared back what they want to do. And actually, food is, they want to know that what they're eating and what they're wearing isn't damaging the environment. And that is a big thing, and will continue to be so.
Thank you. We've got a question from Michelle here, and this is from Julie Friend. Years ago, she sat on a consumer committee for the Food Standards Agency, which sadly was disbanded through lack of funding, she believes. Do you still have a platform to liaise directly with customers somehow?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been answering these. I think like Nisha in the sidebar. So I just sent rather a lot, sorry, Julie, of information back about the consumer committee. But in short, yes. And if anyone's interested, I wrote a paper on it last year. But we because, and I'd be really interested to talk more about that committee actually, because that would have been probably before I came along. But we've got so many ways now, increased funding actually, to talk directly with people at scale on specific topics, deliberatively at length, and then also thousands upon thousands of people at a sort of representative level, that you get it more from the horse's mouth than you do from a committee. So I think that was probably why the panel was disbanded. But I'd be really interested to talk more about that if you wanted to, because that would be before my tenure, as it were.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Charlotte, how are you?
We have another question here from Clarissa Hyman. Hi, Clarissa. This is directed to Michelle and Jason. How much do you think the tension between eating relatively healthily from scratch and buying fast, junky food is related to social class and or income?
Yeah, for me, I mean, intrinsically linked. I think that one of the criticisms of my kind of world, the specialty food world, the organic world, is that it is kind of fairly elitist and expensive. And I think that it's hard to argue about that. But you know, I think traditionally the British, we spend a fairly small portion of our income on food compared to other countries. I used to live in Italy, and I think the percentage of household income that went on food was vastly higher. So we're addicted to kind of cheap mass-produced food, unfortunately. And I think that's what, if you're financially strapped, that's what you end up eating.
I think there's also another tension there, because it's not, I mean, perhaps on the other sort of very high end artisanal, you know, very, very lovely food, that is obviously true. I think also the tension between time poverty and convenience is, you know, comes to play. I think people told us a lot when they had the time to cook. When they think about it, they have an hour a day if they wanted to cook, but the amount of people that do spend an hour cooking a meal is about 5%, unless there's nothing else to do. So I think there's the real time poverty, and then there's the sort of perception of what time people want to allocate to it, and we see, you know, very affluent but very time poor, very busy people, and a lot of younger people not making the time to cook from scratch, picking up things on the go. It's not necessarily class, I would say. It seems to be more correlated with age and occupation.
It's interesting because obviously as a society we do make up a whole strata of incomes and levels of accessibility, etc., etc. So there's a huge amount we have to reconcile within that. It's a lot to take in. So
yeah, people, it's complicated.
Sure. Charlotte, are there any more questions there?
Sally Jane's asking, is time poverty a marketing invention? We've got lots and lots of lovely comments here and observations about changes in people's shopping habits, particularly growth and interest in supporting independence and you know, quality suppliers of fresh fish and meat, for example. Are there any other questions? I think we are broadly
we
to the bottom of the list. Sorry.
Okay, great stuff. Well, we'll launch the final poll, but also I would just go back to the panel and ask the question, is there any silver lining? Is there anything you want to keep from the last year that going forwards has really benefited our food world? Because, you know, there are changes, any disruption, as we said at the start, there's always winners and losers, but is there anything that has changed that perhaps could be for the benefit of us in the future? And that's to all of the panel. And if Jonathan or somebody could launch the poll, that would be amazing too. Yeah, would anyone like to jump in on that?
Just in general from the poll, or just our own personal?
On the silver lining, is there anything that you would like, any changes that you think are positive if we kept them going forwards?
I think valuing the people that serve your food in a supermarket or in a restaurant or anything, those people that are stock the shelves, have kept things going, have really, you know, those kind of really often underpaid, undervalued jobs. I think if we value those people that work in our industry a great deal more, I think that would be a splendid outcome.
I think in the first lockdown, the great thing that came out of it was obviously not taking food for granted. I think people questioned where it came from, how it was supplied to us, what actually was in it. And that raised a load of interesting questions. And like I said earlier, I think this kind of reconnection with the health of the planet and the health of ourselves being kind of intrinsically connected is really powerful. The observations of nature around us, the clear skies, the plants growing, I think, you know, so many things like that are feeding into some really good trends that we're seeing in food consumption around, you know, cutting down on cheap meat. I think that there's always a place for, you know, really well-bred meat, but I'm a lifelong vegetarian, and seeing that kind of trend growing, I think has been connected to what's going on and is a good thing.
I mean, I'm going to come at it from the consumer point of view and their kind of experience of working with consumers and what they understand about food and the food system. And when you talk to people, sometimes we have to do 2 weeks of work just to get them to really get their heads around how complex some of the things are, even just however many, you know, where the ingredients to your Kit Kat can come from and how they get there, you know, is a real shock for people when you ask people to open that Pandora's box of how food is produced and where it's produced and how it's made and grown and killed and, you know, packaged, and all of that people don't really want to touch. They would much rather it arrive perfectly packaged and sanitized. We have lost that connection a bit, and I think it takes something like the shelves being empty to make people jolt back into a reflective space and really reconsider what choices they're making. I'm not here to make value judgments against those choices. For as many people who talk to me about the less and better, there's people who say I just need to feed my kids, right? And I can't make a value choice between those. So but I hear people actually engaging much more spontaneously, much more readily with the complexity of it, the power dynamics in it, the business models in it, and making a bit more of an active choice, which I think can only be a good thing.
Yeah. And Nisha, do you have any thoughts?
For me, I think what people really realised, and it goes back to the poll that you started this conversation with, which was very, very edifying, was that the lights on the high street are the hospitality lights. And never quash an impulse to eat out, you know, eat out to help out for as long as you can and to spread that message, because we will be the fiscal oil as restaurants that will keep the producers in business, the farmers in business. We will buy everything that they have to grow, and we will present you with a table around which you can sit with the people that you love and enjoy good food and not have to wash up, and it won't hurt your pockets. And we employ so many people that need it, pay so many good taxes, and do so much in terms of charity as an industry. So the future's so bright. If that's the only mandate from the whole of this is just eat out as much as you can when you get to I was a spring voter, I was saying, because I do think that come March, once the most vulnerable have been vaccinated, I think we will start to see hospitality slowly open up again at the beginning of March, and then come and bash the doors down, because it's far more than food.
Well, I'll be the first in the queue, actually, because
I'll be with you.
I am sick of my food. And I'm a good cook, but I would really like to have somebody else cook me dinner.
It's a dream, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
We have no friends that cook for us. It's dreadful.
Brilliant. So did we have a result on that last poll? Did Charlotte, is that?
Yes, I think Jonathan shared them. Joint third, table service in bars and eat out to help out both had 9%. More home cooking had 38% in second, and the better understanding of our supply chains received 44%.
That's interesting, really interesting to hear. And yeah, a fascinating discussion, because we've touched on everything from food poverty through to sort of the most expensive products, and from technology through to, you know, the intimate human connection that we all have around food, and, you know, all of these seemingly opposites, but they all do weave together into this sort of web of food that we all are so intrigued by. So it's been a fascinating discussion. I would really, really love to thank Nisha, Michelle, Jennifer and Jason for joining us this evening and sharing their thoughts about what we can do going forwards, and everything that's happened. It's been genuinely fascinating and really great to hear your thoughts. So thank you very, very much for joining us, joining all of us tonight. And also thanks to the audience, for everyone, all the other guild members coming along and joining us as well. It's brilliant, and all the great questions and comments. Yeah, really, really love it. And I think this is probably a good point to wrap up. So I'll wish you all a safe journey back to your sofas or dining tables or wherever you're going next. And see you all again at a guild event. So wish you all good night.
And thank you, Gavin, for pulling up this event together for us tonight as well. Really appreciate it. Thanks again to our speakers, and thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. Bye.
Right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.